earliest of early Jefferson City history, really Mossy Creek history. So where we're standing here is that beginning. We made mention that this gravel road is what was left of the old Dandridge Road. So this is the road that people would come from Dandridge would come in to go to Mossy Creek. This is the road that they would ride on, and they would cross the bridge that's left over there. And we'll talk about that in a minute and its significance. But this is open for anybody. As a Carson Inman employee, I'm going to put a plug in. This is open for you at any time to come walk. It is one of the best places to exercise and walk during the year. We have done some things. We've got a couple spots that are archaeologically significant that we're working with, and Carson Inman has a new biblical archaeology major. Probably won't be able to go to Israel this year because of the conflicts over there, but we're going to do some things over here. So this is an area of historical significance. It's one of the most aesthetically pleasing places in all of Jefferson City to go visit when it's tree lined and everything else. Now I would say that don't come here in February because with all the rains, this is usually flooded down here almost to the top of the sign. So there's some that this is a floodplain also, but it is. So we're gonna begin just kind of with a little bit of a backdrop of the history of why this place at this time, and then so that you can understand why we're standing here. Now this represents the far right flank of the Union line in 1863. So this is the far right, and we're going to visit the center, and then we'll visit the left. And so you'll have a kind of an idea of where that is. But just wanted to kind of share a little bit of the backstory. And Mike does a really good job of kind of sharing, from Chickamauga through Knoxville, just a little bit of, just a brief kind of overview of what's going on. If you want to.
Okay, let's kind of set the stage in why are we here. And I want to hit a lot of high points, but to give you the idea so you can do your own research. General James Longstreet, his troops, they left Chattanooga. He was sent up here to get Burnside out of Knoxville. That help? Okay. So, he had the failed siege and assault on Fort Sanders. The reason he had to do it early because reinforcements were coming up out of Chattanooga because Bragg's army was already defeated. So Burnside had to do what he had to do quick.
A guy named Sherman was leading that assault.
So it went bad for them, and they said, okay, I cannot rejoin you, so I'm going to exit back to Virginia. That's why they came up, basically Highway 11W, as we call it today. They were headed back to Virginia. When Longstreet got to the Rogersville area, he received a telegram from Richmond receiving command of all Confederate forces in East Tennessee. Basically, he was a department head. Some people say independent commander. It goes either way. He saw his opportunity to get back into Knoxville. He said, all right, let's turn on the Union forces at Bean Station. Because General Shackelford's cavalry and a little bit of artillery and infantry were there at Bean Station. They were following him. So, then they had the Battle of Bean Station, December 14th, 15th, and 16th. They won. But they stayed on the north side of the Holston River for about 2 weeks, reckoning and ordering supplies and dealing with their dead and wounded before they came south of the Holston. Then they set up their winter quarters in Morristown, Russellville. But at the whole time, Longstreet was wanting to get back into Knoxville if possible. Now, if you look at the agricultural crop season of 1863, it was a bumper crop year for agricultural products. That's why they stayed. If you look on a map, the narrowest point in this valley is roughly Morristown, Russellville from the Holston to the north, Nolichucky, and French Brow to the south. Okay, he had control of the railroad from Morristown back into Virginia. He was able to get supplies. But in the meantime, you've got to feed these guys. You've got to feed these animals. So part of what was going on when the federal forces come here, they knew they had Confederate forces in Panther Springs area and coming back. It was on account of the agricultural resources that were here in the valley that was feeding the army. They were hunting for food stuff. That's why a lot of things going on in Dandridge. They were hunting for food. And that kind of set the stage for this engagement here, because the federal forces were coming up, the winter was turning bad, and you had green federal troops that fought in this conflict. From a reenactor's point of view and their point of view, the first time they saw the face of battle, it was called, we saw the elephant. So I'll turn it back over to David now.
All right.
The stage step.
So what happens is that around Christmas time in 1863, Union forces crosses Strawberry Plains. There was a big Ferry Point crossing because all the railroad bridges and all the bridges had been burned by both sides. Our poor little bridge in Jefferson City, I think we counted at least 7 times it was burned, right? So as soon as they built it, so Union forces couldn't supply their forces because their train could only go to Strawberry Plains and that was it, right? So it had to be by wagon or it had to be whatever you could go find. And so Union forces pushed into New Market up from Strawberry Plains and pushed the Confederates back as they went through because, like Mike said, they were trying to protect the supplies of corn and bacon, basically. And so there's a writer that says the battle for East Tennessee was a battle for corn and bacon. And that's what it was. And so the Union forces pushed in, went up from New Market, and they decided at first that they would turn towards Dandridge. And so New Market and Mossy Creek and Dandridge formed a triangle that people would often travel in that triangle, right? And so at first the Union forces try to push into Dandridge. The Confederate forces are there and they meet head on and there's an engagement there. Several of the Union soldiers that were captured there would end up going to Andersonville Prison, right, from the 9th Pennsylvania. And so what you have is the 1st and 2nd Brigade of the Army of the Cumberland. It's really cavalry that is here, right? So you have soldiers from Illinois, you have soldiers from Indiana, you have soldiers from Ohio, you have Pennsylvania. You also have 1st East Tennessee Union Cavalry, who are men who are from this area in East Tennessee that decided to fight for the Union and escaped into Kentucky in order to be able to do so. Because the sympathies in this area were so split, in fact, in Jefferson County, the vote was overwhelmingly to remain in the Union when they did take the vote. But what happens is that they decided they're going to push, and so they're in their home territory. So they know the roads, they know the back roads. They push into the Dandridge, they're kind of repulsed, but nobody really has control of Dandridge because the Confederates don't want it either. They decide then on Christmas Day to move into Mossy Creek. On Mossy Creek on December 25th, 1863, Union forces with the support of artillery push into Mossy Creek and push the Confederates out. Now the Confederates are trapped on this side of the creek. There's Tennessee cavalry stuck on this side of the creek. The creek now, thin little crossing, a horse could probably jump over the creek at some points, but at that time it was a lot wider. We talked about the people that were here earlier, that about every 400 feet there was a raging waterfall. So it supported industry. So it was wider, it was wetter, it was swollen. And so as Confederate forces pushed the Union, they had to retreat. Well, the only bridge is actually right over here. What remains of it is over there. It's a small bridge abutment on both sides. The Confederates retracted and had to get across. And so what happened was they found a shallower place to ford, and they kind of created a diversion so the Army could get back. The Union Army then pushed in that day, pushed the Confederates back, and eventually settled on the top of this hill right here, right? And through this area along this, behind these hills is where the Union Army settled on Christmas Day. From Christmas Day to December 29th, there was just little running engagements. They were trying to find out where the Confederates were, and the Confederates were trying to find out how much of the Union was there, and so they were fighting there. The guy that was on this side, on the far right, protecting the Union, was probably one of the best and most able commanders in the Union Army at that time, cavalry commanders, and his name was William Jackson Palmer. William Jackson Palmer would later go on to win the Congressional Medal of Honor. He's one of my favorite people in the study, in the thousands of hours of studying this, one of my favorite people to study. One, I lived in Delaware, was born in Pennsylvania. William Jackson Palmer was born in Delaware and raised in Pennsylvania, right? So there's that empathetic feeling that we talked about. But Palmer was a Quaker. and believed in pacifism, but believed in the cause of abolition greater than the cause of pacifism. And so he decided that he was going to fight for the Union Army. He raised a troop of cavalry, was at Antietam, and was asked by McClellan to go scout the other side of the river, put on civilian clothes, went across the river, was captured over there. If he's captured and they know he's an officer, he can be hung. Was sent to Libby prison, gave him a fake name, eventually got out. The 15th Pennsylvania was sent over here to Murfreesboro. When they went over there, the 15th Pennsylvania basically mutinied because they didn't want to serve under another commander and didn't like where they were. Eventually Palmer gets out, rejoins his troop, reorganizes, and it becomes one of the best cavalry units for the Union Army in the entire Civil War. And so Palmer, if you read his accounts, in the 4 or 5 days leading up to the battle, scouts all the way through Cotton County, through Newport, all the back roads here. He was a railroad man by trade, and so Palmer explored this area. It was at the Montcastle Estate on the hill on the morning of the battle, and sees the Confederate army coming over and decides that he has to get back and protect the right flank, the bridge, so that the Union Army can't be overwhelmed and trapped on this side of the creek. So he rides back and comes here. Eventually he resettles right here where we are and leads a charge against Confederates, against Texas unit that is pushing through the Benjamin Brander estate. That's the other house that's over here that's covered by trees. And he pushes through the back of there, and while he's pushing through, one of his soldiers is shot through the lungs, and several of his other men are there. And he says it's one of the biggest regrets of the war is that he didn't send people out in front that where he would go. But Palmer, just so we don't spend too much time on Palmer, but he's worth it. If you've been to Colorado Springs and you like Colorado Springs, then thank Palmer, because he's the guy that basically made Colorado Springs happen. He put a railroad line in at the end of he was a railroad person at the end of the war, and recommended they run a line up to Pikes Peak into the springs there, and that's where Colorado Springs came. There's a high school named after him. There's statues of him in there. I got a chance to speak there last spring. The Pioneer Museum is basically in dedication to Palmer, and so he is somebody that is well known. And they would have, the 15th Pennsylvania was such a tight-knit unit that they would have reunions every year after the war, and they would get together to commemorate what happened. Right? So that's a little bit of the right flank of the Union line. And so what you have here is you have cavalry from the 15th Pennsylvania, and you have Texas Rangers on the other side. And that's who's fighting on this flank of the battlefield. On the morning of the 29th, based on orders from General Foster, who wanted to deny forage to both Mossy Creek and Dandridge, he said to them, why don't you split your force up and send half of your force to Dandridge and then keep half of your force here. And so all the soldiers say it's a tomfool mission, right? Except for General Foster, right? Who thought it was a great idea to brag to General Grant that he did this. And so basically 2nd Brigade was sent through past Tar Chevrolet. It's not Tar Chevrolet at that time. And the hoagie shop. And the hoagie
landmark today.
And the hoagie shop and out to Dandridge. And so when they're attacked on the morning of the 29th, they had to send fast riders to go get them to have them to come back, right? So that's why this bridge was so important to be protected, and that's why we stand here on the right flank.
Then you've got the Chucky Pike right over here, just side away, and basically you got the Brandon House here and there, where Walmart is and Lowe's. That's part of the battlefield. Okay, that's part of that, more of that flank where they shot. Then they also had artillery position up here on the hill. We call it under Mock's Battery. It was looking down Chucky Pike Road and stuff, and we'll get into some more of that kindly at our next stop. And there's any more to add for this right now?
No, all I would put in is, again, as a plug, that as you go along here, you'll see the quarries. One of the greatest things about this area is if you want to understand Jefferson City history, you need to understand this area. That we know that for a short period, Davy Crockett's family lived on the creek here, right? This would be a hub of industry in the 1840s, 1850s, 1860s. Our first post office is down there. It's not there anymore, but that's where it was.
This
right?
was Mossy Creek's business district.
This was the business district, and so it was the Haynes Iron Works, and it was Iron Works. And before that, if you lived in Jefferson City, Mossy Creek, you would have to ride to Greenville to go get your mail. And so, when the Haynes Iron Works comes about, that's the mail. That's the center of mail. That's the city building, right? The original college for Carson Newman starts down there, also at Mossy Creek Baptist. When the battle's being fought, there is a Mossy Creek Baptist College, and it's right on the hill, right, basically up here, right? So this is the area that if you live, this would be the center of business. If you think back, those of you that are old enough to remember Little House on the Prairie and the lumber mills with the water power, that's what this is. That's what this is. And so this is a place of significance that you would go through. And the reason why people will say, well, why do they fight at Mossy Creek? Because you have the road to Dandridge, you have the road from Morristown to Knoxville that meet. You had the bend of the Chucky River Road that we know as Chucky Pike. You have the East Tennessee and Virginia Railroad, and they all meet at the same spot. And most battles of the Civil War are fought at junctions or at river crossings, right? And so this is why here, right? And you have a giant mill where all the corn that they can turn into flour, the Union Army wants at that point. And so that's why here. That's why the battle is here. Okay. So our next spot on the tour.
Okay, those of you that want to look at the bridge abutment,
Yeah.
it's over there on the creek. Get your pictures and stuff. And our next stop will be the ball field.
Yeah.
Talk about Eli Lilly's gun position, and that's where we will gather next. And just do not go back up the hill. It's a one-way. Go out this way. Follow your map and
Go
stuff.
right to Old H Ed and make a right on
Make
Old
a
H
right.
Ed.
We'll meet up at the ball field up here.
Plenty of parking.
Are there any questions or anything about this section of the battlefield and the importance of the roads?
How many troops were here?
Different accounts depending on who you say, and accounts, because a lot of times, like the 15th Pennsylvania was here, but only those that had good horses could make the ride up from Chattanooga, and so it's hard to say. Some would say that it was 4,000 to 6,000
Oh,
Union
that many.
versus 4,000 to 6,000 Confederates. Probably not that many,
Uh-huh.
but that's around that. The
So-
Union also had infantry that came up from the Army of the Ohio, and so the accurate accounts of where that is, whereas the Confederates tended to be everybody that was part of the assault for the Confederate Army was part of the cavalry.
So there's both sides, there's probably 10,000 here.
Less than that.
Yeah.
It'd be less than that because they were not at full strength, as you say, because a lot of them didn't have mounts, and they were scattered out. Like I say, first off, we had Union troops detached from here, and then they heard the fighting, then they ran back, like I say, to protect this, while they were being assaulted by the Confederates coming out of Panther Springs, coming this way. So they were scattered at the time, but then they would all rally to the sound of the guns, as they say. So those numbers vary,
Yeah.
depending on which account you're reading some days.
And we'll hang here for a minute or two just to
Yeah,
answer any
so you
questions.
can wander
but
around, take pictures.
If
and
you
do
want
things.
if you want to drive to the next side already and get in your car and warm up,
And wait on us, as you say.